They say every legend born on the frontier starts with a night when the wind forgot how to breathe. And so it was with a man they called Colt Mercy, a name spoken only in whispers, the way a churchgoer might speak of the devil at his door. Folks claimed he rode alone because no horse could keep up with him, and no soul dared ride beside him. Others swore he'd been blessed or cursed by something older than the desert itself. But the truth was simpler, and far more frightening. Colt Mercy carried a silence inside him that only broke when someone innocent bled. That silence was the last sound many outlaws heard before the dark took them. On one fateful night, far from the border towns where his legend normally drifted, something awakened inside him. Something deeper, more terrible, more righteous, and Redwater Ridge would never forget it. Redwater Ridge was the sort of place the frontier always seemed to forget. A crooked line of wooden buildings sat wedged between two sun-baked canyons, each structure leaning like it was tired of standing. Dust rolled through the street like restless ghosts, swirling around horses tied to splintered posts. Lanterns hung from porches, their flickering light stretching long shadows across the cracked boardwalks. Every sound, boots on planks, jingling spurs, muttered curses, felt carried on the dry wind that drifted through town. People here lived slow, but danger moved quick. Justice, when it bothered to show up, arrived limping and out of breath. Most days, the sheriff stayed behind his desk, chewing tobacco and praying trouble passed by before noticing his badge. Redwater Ridge had grown used to minding its own business. But rumors had a way of beating riders into town, rumors of a feared outlaw heading their way. Whispers curled like smoke outside the saloon doors, men lowering their voices as if the very walls might tell on them. No one expected the night to end in blood, but everyone felt something brewing in the desert air, thick enough to taste. Inside the Lone Coyote saloon moved Lila May, soft-spoken, quiet, and carrying more weight in her eyes than on her shoulders. She wiped down tables with small, careful motions, as though afraid of taking up too much space in the world. Her dark hair was tied back with a faded blue ribbon, and her dress, though clean, showed patches of wear from long shifts and longer nights. Folks noticed she never raised her voice, never argued, never lingered too close to anyone. Trouble had followed her once, years ago, and carved its story into her like a knife etching lines into wood. Though she never explained, the bruises on her arms told their own tale, yellow fading into purple, purple fading into blue. She hid them with sleeves, but sleeves don't fool a town that's seen enough sorrow to recognize its own. Still, she showed up every night, serving whiskey with a smile too thin to be real, too brave to be ignored. Some of the cowboys said she had a heart tougher than ironwood, that she kept the saloon running long after the owner lost interest. But if you watched close enough, you'd notice her eyes flinch toward the back door whenever footsteps sounded behind her. She lived like a woman expecting trouble, and dreading it. Just after sundown, the saloon doors creaked open and a chill swept through the room. Not the wind, but something colder, the presence of Colt Mercy. His long coat hung dusty and torn, one side darkened by an old bullet graze. A scar ran from his temple to the edge of his jaw, pale against sun-worn skin. He didn't swagger like other gunmen. He didn't grin or greet anyone. He simply walked in with the stillness of a storm holding its breath. The piano player froze halfway through a tune. Two gamblers lowered their cards. Even the drunk passed out in the corner seemed to sense the shift in the air. Colt moved to the bar and sat without a word. Lila May approached him the way one might approach a sleeping wolf, quietly, respectfully, hoping not to stir the beast. When she placed a whiskey in front of him, Colt lifted his eyes just long enough to nod. His gaze was sharp, unsettling, but not unkind. He drank in silence, the room slowly resuming its rhythm around him. He had no intention of staying long. Men like him never did. But when Lila May reached for another glass, her hand trembled so violently she nearly tipped over the bottle. Colt noticed. His scarred brow tightened, not out of anger, but recognition. He'd seen fear like that before, on a night he never forgot. The tray slipped from her hands before she could steady herself. It crashed onto the floor, spilling drinks across the boards. Gasps rose around the saloon, the sound harsh in the quiet. Lila May quickly knelt to gather the shattered pieces, trying to hide her shaking. But she couldn't hide the thin red line trailing down her wrist, fresh blood, smeared across pale skin. Colt stood before he even realized he'd moved. His boots sounded like gunshots against the wooden floor as he knelt beside her. Who did that? His voice was low, steady, but dangerous, the kind of calm a man uses when he's already decided someone must die. Lila May swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "It's nothing," she whispered. "I'm fine." Colt reached out, gently lifting her wrist. The cut was new, jagged, made by someone who wanted to hurt, not warn. His jaw clenched. The room waited, breathless. She tried to pull away, but Colt held her hand just firm enough to steady her trembling fingers. "Tell me," he said. She shook her head. Tears clung to her lashes. "The Stone Creek gang. They cornered me behind a saloon." Her voice cracked. "Said next time I didn't smile at them, they'd make sure I couldn't walk back inside." Colt let go of her wrist slowly, as though setting down something sacred. He stood, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The narrator's voice would later say Colt Mercy had done many violent things across the frontier, shot men in duels, hunted killers through deserts, confronted devils in human skin. But on this night, when he saw Lila Mae's blood on her own hands, he felt something he had not felt in years. Not rage, not hatred. Something sharper, something purer. He had never seen red like he did that night. And before the next dawn, the Stone Creek gang would learn what it meant to awaken the wrath of the quietest, deadliest men the West had ever known. They say every legend begins quietly, like the hush that falls over a town before the storm tears the roofs away. And in the frontier days of the late 1800s, when justice traveled slower than a broken wagon wheel, the townsfolk learned to listen to silences more than gunshots. That is how the tale of Colt Mercy is always told, in a whisper, in a tremble, in a breath someone regrets letting slip. For the outlaw everyone feared never needed to raise his voice. He rode alone, a ghost made of dust and regret, a man whose name could stiffen a sheriff's spine and make gamblers fold their cards without looking at them. But the night he rode into Redwater Ridge, the frontier learned something new. It learned what happened when a man feared for his violence discovers a wound he cannot walk away from. And that night, something awakened in him, something colder, sharper, and far more terrifying than the legend he carried at his back. Redwater Ridge was a tired town, the kind that felt baked into the desert like clay pots left too long in the sun. The boardwalk planks outside the saloon were cracked and sunken, creaking under every boot step. Lanterns hung crooked over doorways, their glow flickering in the canyon wind that slithered between the wooden buildings. The desert night pressed in from all sides, thick and quiet, broken only by the distant howl of a coyote or the groaning wooden sign of the sheriff's office swinging on a loose nail. The air carried whispers, rumors shaped by dust, fear, and half-truths. Folks in Redwater Ridge spoke softly of bandits who came and went, of missing travelers, of debts paid in blood rather than coin. Colt stepped out of the saloon as quietly as he had entered it, but the silence he carried now was different. It was shaped like a storm waiting for a place to break open. The wooden door swung shut behind him, leaving the murmurs of frightened patrons muffled in the dark. A thin layer of dust curled around his boots as he crossed the boardwalk with slow, deliberate steps. The lantern outside flickered in the canyon wind, casting jagged shadows over his face, carving his features into something half-man, half-omen. Across the street, Sheriff Amos stood stiff as a fence post, one hand on his belt buckle, the other twirling a bit of tobacco between his teeth. His eyes followed Colt like a man watching lightning crawl across the sky, too afraid to blink, too wise to interfere. "You ain't thinking of going after them alone, are you?" the sheriff asked, voice thin, strained. Colt didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was a verdict, a vow, and a death sentence all in one. He stepped off the boardwalk, boots crunching through gravel, the moon catching a metallic glint from the revolver holstered at his hip. The sheriff swallowed hard, the weight of the moment sinking into his bones. Everyone in Redwater Ridge knew what it meant when Colt Mercy walked alone into the night. Trouble wasn't coming, judgment was. And this time, it carried the shape of a man who had finally been pushed too far. As Colt reached his horse, something old and shattering tugged at him from the inside. He placed a hand on the saddle but froze as a memory, sharp enough to cut, rose like smoke in the back of his mind. The world around him dimmed, replaced by a younger Colt standing outside a burning ranch house, staring at the bodies of raiders disappearing into the distance. But the worst sight wasn't the raiders, it was the small, shaking figure on the ground. His little sister, the only good thing he had ever known. Her dress was torn, her cheek bruised, her voice barely a whisper when she called his name. He had been late, too late. He carried her in his arms for miles, swearing she would live, swearing he would make it right. But her heartbeat faded like the last embers of a dying fire. She didn't survive the night. He remembered sitting under the desert moon, her small hand cold in his, wishing the world had someone who could punish the wicked faster than they struck. And in that crushing silence, Colt made a promise that burned through the years, that he would become that someone. A ghost to the guilty. A reckoning to the cruel. A quiet man whose wrath would keep other sisters alive. But none of the men he struck down ever brought his sister back. None of the lives he saved ever erased the memory of that night. And now, looking at Lila May's blood on his glove, he felt the past roar awake inside him, an old, unfinished rage rising from a place he tried to bury. He mounted his horse with a controlled steadiness, but his eyes carried the storm. With a sharp tug of the reins, he rode into the darkness, leaving behind the sheriff, the saloon, and the fragile safety of the town. He followed the faint trail of boot prints leading toward the broken rocks west of Redwater Ridge, where the Stone Creek gang liked to hide like snakes in tall grass. The night stretched before him wide and starless, but Colt rode on, unhurried, the hooves of his horse thudding like warnings across the desert floor. The Stone Creek gang's hideout lay tucked between jagged rock formations that jutted upward like the ribs of some ancient beast. A dying campfire cast flickering light across their campsite. Drunken laughter echoed against the canyon walls, loud, careless, the laughter of men who believed nothing in the night could scare them. Their horses were tied loosely to a dead tree, pawing restless circles in the dirt as if they sensed what their riders couldn't. A few tin cups lay overturned near a crate of cheap whiskey. At the center of the camp, Riker Holt, the gang's self-appointed leader, swaggered around with a bottle in hand, telling the same vile story for the 10th time. Should have seen her face, Riker slurred, waving his bottle. Little Barmaid thought she could ignore us. But she learned. The men around him barked in cruel laughter, slapping their knees, drunk on their own cruelty. Colt watched from the shadows, the glow from their lantern stretching across the rocks like thin, trembling fingers. His breath stayed even, his body still, but inside him something ancient stirred, a cold force sharpening itself like a blade. He counted the men silently. 6, maybe 7, all armed, all laughing, all unaware that their night was about to end differently than they had drunk themselves into believing. Colt's fingers tightened around the grip of his revolver. In another life, he might have hesitated. He might have sought a badge, a lawman, a way to do things proper. But that life had died with his sister. And tonight, justice wouldn't be wearing a star. It would be riding a shadow. He stepped forward just enough to see the sky. Then, with a steady hand, he raised his revolver and pulled the trigger. The gunshot cracked through the canyon like thunder splitting the heavens open. Sparks of muzzle flash lit the rocks, and birds scattered from the cliffs in a frenzy of wings. The Stone Creek gang erupted into chaos, shouting, stumbling, reaching for guns they were too drunk to draw straight. Riker dropped his bottle, eyes wide, mouth hanging open as the air changed around them. Because Colt's gunshot wasn't just noise. It was a warning, a claim, a line drawn in the dust. The narrator of such nights would later say the air itself tightened after that first shot, the world leaning forward as if eager to witness what came next. Fear crawled up the men's spines as the echoes faded. Lantern light shook. Horses whinnied. And every man in that camp felt the shadow of reckoning settle over them like a cold hand on the back of their neck. Colt stepped into the lantern glow with the calm of a man who had already lived through hell and didn't mind going back. His coat brushed the rocks, his boots silent against the sand. The firelight painted half his face gold and left the other half in darkness, turning him into something the gang couldn't quite name, but feared instantly. Riker aimed his gun with trembling hands. Who the hell? Colt cut him off with a voice as low as the desert wind. You hit the only good soul in this rotten town, he said. I'm here for all of you. The first shot hadn't finished echoing before Colt moved again. He stepped sideways into the shifting lantern glow, revolver steady, eyes sharp as whetted steel. The Stone Creek gang fired wildly into the dark, drunken panic scattering their aim. Colt didn't waste a bullet. His first return shot hit the gun barrel of a man lunging toward him, sparks flying as metal clanged against rock. The outlaw screamed, dropping his weapon as the bones in his hand cracked. Another rushed from behind a crate, shouting curses, and Colt's next shot tore through the man's belt buckle, sending his pistol skidding across the sand. Colt advanced without hurry, his wrath not a blaze but a frost. Cold, precise, unwilling to forgive. 3 outlaws dove behind a boulder, shouting for Riker to give orders, but Riker was too stunned to speak. Colt's silhouette drifted closer, phantasm-like in the firelight. He fired again, hitting the lantern perched on a crate. The glass shattered, all spilling over the wood, flame erupting upward. In the confusion, Colt redirected his aim, and struck the ground near their feet, forcing the men back into the open. Another outlaw, trembling too hard to aim, lifted his rifle. Colt shot clean through the stock, splitting it in half. "Show yourselves," Colt said, voice low, cutting through the smoke. "Or run. Makes no difference to me." The gang broke. Panic scattered them like leaves in a windstorm. One scrambled up the rocks only to slip and tumble. Another dropped his gun entirely and sprinted into the dark, tripping over his own boots as he ran. Colt didn't chase the cowards. He moved only to dismantle their strength. With each step, with each calm shot, he broke their formation until only one man remained standing, Riker Holt. Color drained from Riker's face. His breath hitched. His hand shook as he lifted his revolver toward Colt, but he never fired. Fear clogged his throat. And then he turned and ran. Riker lunged for his horse, stumbling as he fumbled with the reins. The animal snorted, stomping nervously. Behind him, the camp burned brighter, casting wild shadows across the rocks as the remaining outlaws scattered into the night. Colt watched Riker mount up, watched the leader kick his horse hard and gallop toward the canyon pass without a backward glance. Cowardice didn't surprise Colt. Some men were born bold. Others were born empty. Colt swung into the saddle without hesitation. With a firm grip on the reins, he jerked his horse into motion, hoofs pounding through the camp as sparks and smoke spiraled upward. He didn't shout after Riker. He didn't threaten. He simply rode. The desert wind roared around him as he entered the canyon, the moonlight carving the path ahead into a silver ribbon. Back in the Lone Coyote saloon, the air felt thick and strange. Lila May stood behind the bar, her wounded wrist wrapped in cloth. The townsfolk gathered around her like moths around a lantern, murmuring, whispering, piecing together the truths they'd all known in fragments. "That man, Colt Mercy," someone breathed. "He's wanted in 3 territories. Ain't for robbing or killing decent folks," another added. "He only ever took aim at the wicked. I heard he saved a wagon of settlers when the Black Ridge Coyotes attacked. Pulled 2 kids out of a burning ranch house. Helped a widow bury her husband when no one else dared ride out that far." The stories went on, spoken with wonder instead of fear. Lila listened, each word reshaping the Mun she thought she knew. She had seen the coldness in Colt's eyes, the scar, the silence that followed him like a shadow. She had believed the rumors, that he was dangerous, unpredictable, a ghost wearing a human face. But now, with the town filling the room with whispered truths, she realized he wasn't the monster others painted him to be. He was what the frontier became when the law failed. He was the part of justice no badge could reach. And tonight, he had bled for her. A slow breath left her chest, trembling. "He's not what they say," she whispered softly. "He's what this town needed." Out in the canyon, the world narrowed to the thunder of hooves and the pulse of danger. Colt kept his gaze locked on Riker's dark shape darting between the cliffs. Moonlight streaked the red stone walls, turning them into towering spines edging the narrow pass. Dust kicked up under the horses' hooves, swirling in pale clouds that clung to the air like ghosts unwilling to settle. The canyon echoed with the desperate beat of Riker's flight, hoofbeats that skipped, stumbled, regained speed. Colt pressed forward, leaning into the chase. Every stride of his horse brought him closer, the distance tightening like a noose. Riker shouted curses into the wind, fear cracking his voice. His horse struggled on the uneven ground, nearly buckling as loose stones skittered down the slopes. Ahead, the canyon opened into a wide basin where an abandoned mining shack slouched against the cliffs, its roof sagging under years of neglect. Riker veered toward it. Colt followed. The gang leader dismounted clumsily, stumbling to the shack with shaking hands. He tried to wedge himself behind the collapsing walls, panting, eyes twitching wildly. Colt reined in his horse slowly, dismounting with the care of a man approaching a wounded predator, dangerous, cornered, unpredictable. The wind fell silent. The moon hovered like a pale witness above them. Riker held up both hands, voice breaking. Don't shoot, please." "Mercy, Colt, listen, it wasn't me. It was the others. I didn't lay a hand on her." Colt stepped forward, his expression unreadable. He lowered his gun just slightly, watching Riker crumble into the dirt. "Mercy," Riker begged. "I'm begging you, just let me go." Colt tilted his head, considering him. The desert held its breath. "Mercy is earned," he said quietly. For a moment, Riker dared to hope. He exhaled shakily, shoulders sagging. But that flicker of hope twisted instantly into desperation. His hand shot under his coat, reaching for a hidden knife tucked against his ribs. Colt's gun rose with the same cold precision he had shown all night. The shot rang out. Riker fell. The canyon swallowed the sound, leaving only dust and silence behind. Dawn bled slowly over the horizon, painting the desert in streaks of pale gold and soft rose. The canyon winds had quieted, leaving behind only the steady clip of hooves as Colt Mercy rode back toward Redwater Ridge. Dust clung to him like a second skin, his coat torn, hat low, revolver still warm against his side. He guided his horse with the same calm gravity he'd shown in the gunfight, as if nothing that had happened during the night had shaken him. But the town felt different. Quieter. Holding its breath again. When Colt reached the saloon, he swung down from the saddle and tied the reins with a slow, deliberate motion. A few townsfolk had gathered outside, men who had once mocked his silence, women who had once flinched when he walked by, children who had been warned to avoid him. They stood at a cautious distance, gazes flicking between him and the rising sun. Gratitude trembled on their tongues, wrestling with fear they weren't sure how to release. Colt gave none of them a glance. He dusted his gloves, took a single breath, and began to walk toward the saloon door as if returning from an ordinary errand. But people stepped aside, parting like water around a stone. No one dared speak first. They all sensed the truth. Some storms leave the land cleaner, others leave it marked forever. Inside, Lila May waited. She had not slept, pacing the same worn boards behind the bar as the night slowly crumbled into morning. Her eyes were red from fear and exhaustion, but the moment Colt entered, relief flashed across her features, immediate, involuntary, unmistakable. She hurried toward him, stopping only when she realized she was inches from placing her hands on his chest. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly, voice shaking with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. "You didn't have to go after them. Not for me." Colt's eyes met hers, steady, unshielded for the first time. "No woman should suffer what you did," he said quietly. "Not while I breathe." The words were simple, but something inside Lila May shifted. All her life, she had met men who bragged, threatened, bluffed, or hid behind lies. Colt Mercy was none of those men. He was carved from a quieter stone, one that didn't ask for thanks, didn't seek approval, didn't care for praise. He cared about right and wrong in a way that frightened people because it left no room for compromise. But there was something more in his gaze now, something deeper, as if the night had peeled away a layer he'd spent years locking away. Lila searched his eyes, unsure what she was looking for, but certain she'd find something that mattered. "Why?" she whispered. "Why risk your life for someone the world ignores?" Colt hesitated. His breast stirred. And for the first time, he let truth rise from somewhere long buried. "I wasn't always an outlaw," he said. "Once, I wore a uniform." The room seemed to shrink around them as he spoke. "I was a scout for the U.S. Cavalry. Rode ahead of battalions, mapped routes, tracked ambushes. I knew the land better than I knew myself. And I followed orders, every one, until they gave me one I couldn't obey." His voice lowered, rubbing against old wounds. "We were sent to pacify a settlement. Families. Children. They called them rebels, but they weren't." Lila heard the tremor in his words even if he kept his face still. "I refused to guide them. Refused to let the soldiers ride in blind. And for defying the order, they branded me a traitor." He paused. "I disappeared before they could hang me. But I didn't disappear into nothing. I used the one skill I had left. Tracking. Finding men who hurt the defenseless. Ending them before they created more ghosts." A stunned silence wrapped around the room. Colt stood rigid, as if waiting for judgment long overdue. Lila stepped closer. "You saved people," she said gently. "And they called you a traitor for it." Colt's mouth twitched, a half-smile, half-pain. "That's how legends start," he murmured. "Not from truth, but from lies." The moment hung between them until Colt turned away, as if afraid staying any longer would break something he couldn't repair. He walked toward the exit, shoulders heavy with the weight of leaving. Outside, the sunlight had grown brighter, illuminating the dust swirling around his boots. He tightened his saddle, preparing to ride out, because men like him didn't linger. They didn't belong anywhere for long. But Lila May followed him onto the boardwalk, voice trembling as she called his name. "Don't go," she pleaded. "Not like this. Not after what you did." Colt didn't turn at first. He breathed in the desert air, the scent of sun-baked earth and distant juniper. Finally, he faced her. "I don't stay," he said softly. "Trouble follows me too close. And you deserve peace." She shook her head. "You're leaving me with a quiet that's louder than fear." Colt's eyes softened, not pity, but something far gentler. He reached into his coat and removed a small silver pendant. The chain was worn, the charm simple, shaped like a crescent moon. "It belonged to my sister," he said. "She was the strongest person I ever knew. Braver than me." Lila's breath caught. "She would have wanted someone like you to have it," Colt continued. "Someone who stands tall even when the world gives her reasons not to." He placed the pendant in her palm, closing her fingers around it with the lightest touch. Lila's eyes shimmered with emotion she couldn't hide. "Will I ever see you again?" she whispered. Colt stepped back, the morning light outlining his silhouette like a figure fading into a story. "Legends don't visit towns twice," he said. "They ride through, and leave when they're needed somewhere else." He mounted his horse. The town gathered behind Lila, watching in silence. Not a single voice rose to protest. No one tried to stop him. They all understood something sacred was passing through their lives, something that couldn't be claimed or kept. As Colt nudged his horse forward, the narrator's voice, timeless, steady, seemed to drift with the wind. "Some heroes wear badges. Some wear scars. But the frontier remembers only this. The night the most feared outlaw became the protector every woman prayed for, and then rode away before dawn could thank him.